Blaine Hogan, I am just honored to have you on For Real. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Kim.
So excited to talk with you, not only because you are a Minnesotan, really, in temperament,
yes,
birth, growing up.
yes,
right?
all of those things. Yes.
Is it true or is it not that your name is Blaine and for a while you lived in Blaine, Minnesota?
Kim, this is a true statement. Hashtag facts. Let me clarify, though. I was born in Fargo, North Dakota.
Oh, an even more illustrious town.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
On the eve of a blizzard, I'm told.
Okay.
Which is most of the year in Fargo, North Dakota.
Could be any day. Yep.
And then we moved to Blaine, Minnesota when I was 4 years old. And it was just this random fluke. My parents found a reasonable duplex home that they said that's where we should live. And who cares that it happens to be the name of our son? So I went around seeing the city of me everywhere. At a water tower, and basically in my backyard. I went to Blaine High School. When I finally went to high school and the cheerleaders would go beep beep BLAIINE, I was like, this is amazing. Yeah.
It's so amazing. During stages where, most of us need a little pick-me-up. I feel like you just had it built in.
Yeah, this kid with a bowl cut from the land of 10,000 lakes, skinny as all get out, smallest kid in every class. I had a big head, but I did need some of that encouragement. I didn't date any of the cheerleaders, but they all yelled my name.
And you'll always have that.
I will always have that. No one can take that away from me.
That's just so amazing. Okay, Blaine, before we go too far, tell me who you, in case folks haven't met you yet, who you are, Blaine, how you spend your days and with whom you spend your days.
So how I spend my days now is mostly as a commercial filmmaker. I do a lot of work with celebrities, and it goes from, I'll give you the last maybe month of work.
Okay.
Was with something with Usher, something with Joe Jonas, and then just last week, I did a regional grocery store commercial with a dancing chicken mascot.
BLA.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. It's all over the place. So I spend my days mostly writing treatments for commercial projects.
What is a treatment? What does that mean?
Oh, yeah, of course. No. So the way commercial filmmaking works as a director, it's really interesting because the director in a commercial that you see on television usually is the last person to touch the project. So what happens is, let's just give an example, like Coca-Cola says, we need a commercial. So they hire an ad agency. Ad agency puts together all of the creative behind it, says, this is what the campaign is going to be. It's going to be Simone Biles and she's going to do this. And this is what it's going to look like. And this is the voiceover. Okay, now we need a director. So the agency goes to multiple production companies all over the world, and they have directors submit treatments. And so they'll whittle it down to 3, and it's essentially a director's audition. Okay. And so I will be competing with 2 other directors, and I will write what's called a treatment, which basically is a visual production schedule, like basically a document that's usually 40 to 50 pages long that shows exactly how I will interpret the Simone Biles Coca-Cola script. And then we wait, and one of us gets it and 2 of us don't. And that's how commercials get made, Kim.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
I've never heard any of that.
Yep,
I always
it's crazy.
just assume the company has a great idea and they find someone like you to make it happen. But you are auditioning for these things over and over.
Yeah, it's very much like when I was an actor, which I'm really glad I have had that experience because, actors get a rate of return about 2%. The amount of auditions that they go on against the ones that they get is extremely low. So I have a really high tolerance for failure.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and trying. So that's mostly what I spend my time doing during the day. My wife is a writer, so I spend a lot of time with my wife, Margaret. She's actually the real writer in our family. She is working on some books, and our first year of marriage, when we were living in Chicago, she went back and forth to LA as part of a screenwriting program. And it's one of the reasons why we ended up here in Atlanta, where we live literally across the street from one of the biggest movie studios outside of Los Angeles. It's a town and a studio called Trilith. And the two of us spend the rest of our time with our three daughters, who are amazing and just a handful. And my wife and I met in theater school, so they just don't stop talking or acting, singing, dancing, parading around the house, making our lives just an absolute joy. When you see yourself expressed in a tiny little girl who just won't stop singing show tunes, you're like, golly, I made that, didn't I? That's us. So
they got a double dose. I mean, they have both
really
genetic.
Is.
Yeah.
They had no chance, Kim.
No. You weren't going to have an accountant, okay, Blaine? If you were looking for a CPA.
Oh, my gosh. No, I will say our oldest daughter, Ruby, who's 11 years old, loves math.
Fantastic.
Loves math. So that one got out somewhere, and we don't know what's happening, because while she loves math, she also is in the featured ensemble of James and the Giant Peach Jr. at Flat Rock Middle School.
Okay, that's actually dynamic duo of gifting. I mean, if she can harness both of those, she will take care of you in your old age, which is perfect.
That's what I'm planning on that. I don't know what it's like to have sons, of course, because I only have daughters. But I do imagine, I imagine being taken care of in the future. And I can only think of that because my brother and I we're like, sorry, Mom. Good luck.
Not the caretakers.
No, not at all.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I would love to talk with you a little bit, Blaine, about this tenacity. You've already mentioned it, the 2% return rate, right? This stubbornness. The book you have written is called Exit the Cave. And we are going to dive into that. It's a beautiful book. It's an unflinching book. And I have all respect for a book like that, because I think lots of times what we do, even on the page, is to hide. And you talk about that. So I want to get into that. And I would love first to hear about this stubbornness you have. So the 2% return on your commercials, 2% return on auditions. There's a moment in your book where you are querying over and over, every writer needs to listen to this. Okay? Because this is a strange job you have, a strange job I have. And the need that this courage, this stubborn, I think it's a holy stubbornness myself, because you can't possibly screw up enough courage on your own to do this for many, many, many years. Yeah. There's this point in your book where you have one of those old diner tabs where you put a slip of paper every time you query, you slap one of those babies down, because it reminds you that things are moving ahead. So I would love for you to talk to me about this, because I think you have this in spades. This stubbornness and this tenacity, both in your work life and in your heart life. So first, for work. Sure. You mentioned you've worked with everybody from LeBron, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I saw in your Insta feed, Joe Jonas. And you had a recurring role on Prison Break. I mean, you've done some stuff. Wicked, the musical, called you to see if you wanted to be Bach, and you turned them down. I've read that part out loud to all the Wicked freaks in my family. Yes. And you've also been the Tutti Frutti man, the Pepto Bismol man, the dancing chicken, the selfie, right. The cell phone where teenagers would heckle you. You have done your homework, Kim. I love you have these are deep cuts. You said from my career. I guess I did write them in my book. You're the one who wrote it. So here's my question. I haven't read it, Kim. It's in there. It's coming out in November. Okay. So buckle down. So here's my question, Blaine. What in the work first, what keeps you going? Is this a born with thing? I mean, you mentioned your daughters. Are you watching the same tenacity and stick to itiveness in your daughters, or is it a
Mm,
learned thing? Coach us, because we have a lot of people in all work, right?
yeah,
All
yeah,
areas who are
yeah.
having to kind of dig deep and wondering, how long do I do this? How do I do it well?
Oh
Coach us.
gosh, that's such a great question. I think there's probably something that is innate to that. I mean, when you grow up on the frozen tundra of Minnesota, and you're like, why we probably don't have to live here. Like we chose to live where it's 800 below for 17 months of the year. Why?
Yes,
And so
yes.
I think that there probably is some like Irish, Norwegian, Swedish, just like we are going to, just mush our way through life on lutefisk and lefse. If for those of you who are Midwest people,
Totally.
no, most people have no idea what we're talking about.
It's okay.
So
They
I
can
think that there's
Google.
probably something like innate in that, like in the cellular level. Also, I think that I came from a family that experienced a lot of failure. I think that I saw my mom as a diabetic who had recurring seizures again and again throughout my whole childhood and her life, and she kind of got up and kept going. My dad, who unfortunately lost his battle to addiction, he it as hard as it was to be in relationship with an addict, and that baton eventually got passed on to me, I still saw him getting up and trying again and again and again. It was always, this time will be different. This time will be different. And so I think because I saw a lot of failure, but I also saw a lot of, we're going to keep on trying, whatever that looks like, however feeble or meek it is. And so I think that really catalyzed that. Also, I think for me, the arts became a safe haven, a place for me to hide from some of the darker parts of my family and my story. And so combine some of the comfortability with failure along with the desperate need to stay connected to a place that in many ways the theater and art saved my life. I just tried to do everything I could to stay in that world. And in some ways, I think that was to my detriment, as I talk about in the book. While the theater community is an unbelievably welcoming place, it also can be very lonely for a performer. You spend time in this community of people, you rehearse and then perform for, hundreds or thousands of people or more, and then you go home by yourself. And that pattern became a pattern for me that was an incubator for my addiction. So I would say, from a work standpoint, it was kind of the combination of those things. And then also from a life standpoint, now I feel like the things have changed where the way I talk about it in the book is that at one point I'd come to a place where I realized I had been able to be so creative and imaginative in my artistic life, but I was not using any of those tools or skills creativity that I had as an artist in service of my actual real life when I most needed it. And so now, as I look back on this kind of 15-year odyssey of my recovery from abuse and addiction, I now feel like I can harness the power of a lot of those lessons where, because I hit rock bottom, because I have the gift of addiction, as I like to call it, that I get this opportunity every single day to choose life or death. And so the tenacity now comes from, I want to be a better dad. I want to have a better life. I want to be more whole. Of course, I'd love to make great art and make money, creating. But at this point, the tenacity for creativity is more about staying alive and having a good, whole-hearted life.
Well, there's a lot there. You should write a book. You did. Listen, so
If my wife were listening, she'd be like, you can wrap it up now. That's good.
nope,
You just gotta.
I love it. I'm totally here for it. This is hitting me at a really interesting time because
Mm,
I flew in back home last night from New York,
okay.
and I've been there twice in the last month, solely for musical theater reasons.
What have you seen?
The Music Man with Hugh
Oh,
Jackman and Sutton Foster. Let's just
amazing.
have a
You've
moment.
seen that twice?
Okay, yeah, that's what we call lunacy. So the first trip was just I'm a huge fan of really of Sutton, and also he was fantastic.
I bet. Yes,
yes,
I've not
very
seen
good.
it.
It was fantastic. Went with my husband, came home, and it was the week that a friend of ours passed away. And
Oh,
I blame Charlie. Charlie died. And the second
mm,
trip is because of Charlie, because it was very much like, I need to take my mom to this and I need to take my daughters to this. Let's go.
yeah.
And so they were both wonderful trips, but I was reading your book throughout this. And
Oh, wow.
so and we had exactly what you describe in the book of these wonderful experiences with beautiful storytelling. And of course, the Music Man is straight up Iowa. So it was just all this fun for me. We'd get off,
Right.
go to the 50th Street subway entrance and see some of the folks who were in the show getting on the
Yeah.
subway. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
jarring, it's like when you see your teacher in the grocery store.
Totally.
There's another life. They have another
Yep.
life. And
Yep.
I don't presume to know what was going on in their heads, but I felt that shift of we were all in this communal experience together and now they're on their own in the subway
It's weird.
with their earbuds in, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
imagine how the joy of that and that communal experience can almost make the loneliness feel bigger.
A
So
hundred
you
percent.
did that.
Yeah, and I would say what I want to be careful is I don't want to demonize at all the act of the work of that,
No,
or that everyone feels how I felt.
no,
I
Clark.
think
Oh, definitely not.
so I just want a disclaimer of that. But yes, I did. And for me, it's a little bit like Birdman. I don't know if you've seen the film Birdman, where Edward Norton's character is a phenomenal actor, but he comes to the place where he realizes the only place that he can be real is on stage inside of another character. As soon as he steps off the stage and he tries to kind of re-enter himself, he's unable to do so because he is not engaged any part of his own story. And so for a very long time, that was me. And I had engaged so many other characters' stories and had found such great success there. It became a really amazing place for me to hide until it became too much. The body keeps the score, and eventually you can no longer outrun your story. And eventually, as things were kind of going up and to the right, as you said, I was on a TV show. I was going back and forth to New York, auditioning for Broadway producers. I was working for all the best theaters in Chicago. And at the same time, my life was falling apart. And it all kind of came to a head where I am so grateful. I am so grateful. I call it the gift of rock bottom. A new friend, Laura McCowan, wrote a book called We Are the Luckiest. It's about her sobriety journey with alcohol. And she means it when she says addicts. We're the luckiest. Now, the great thing, Kim, is everyone is an addict. That's a whole other topic. So we all have the opportunity to hit our own rock bottoms for our stories to finally catch up with us so that we can maybe stop playing a part or stop playing a role, hiding in some of those places and begin to engage the parts of our story that really need care.
I think that what you're saying so beautifully is actually not just musical theater or acting. I think the reason that there is this pull in your story and in your book is that we all have those coping mechanisms. I know plenty of stay-at-home moms who don't know how to be themselves without being a stay-at-home mom. I'm saying we get into the lane and that's who we are.
We all have those roles.
Yes. And we forget how to be really listening, as you said, not only to the body, but to your spirit. You have done very hard work in this realm. You have listened past the point where most people would listen. You have written a very brave book. I commend you for writing
Thank
such a
you.
brave book. It looks at your life and your story and just does not, it's a laser focused gaze, which seems to be a close cousin to this stubbornness you show in your work. And my question is why? Because I'm a writer too, and I know the why is super important. Everybody feels good about the first 3 chapters. I'm writing my book. And by about,
Yeah.
20,000 words in, you're like,
Ooh.
I wish I were macrameing. How about learning how to tap dance? It's a it's a
Sure.
gutting exercise, and you did the
Yes.
whole darn thing, and you didn't have to. So
Yeah.
talk to me about the why.
Sure. So I got a book contract for a book about the creative process in 2018. I was still at that time on staff at this big mega church called Willow Creek Community Church. I was the creative director, had been for a decade. I knew my time there was coming to an end, and I was going to be pursuing what I'm doing now. I feel so lucky to be doing it. And at that time, I was surrounded by so many authors. It's a weird thing to be in kind of that creative megachurch world. And as I sat down to write that book in 2018, it was also the same time it coincided with the collapse of our church, and Willow Creek began to crumble. The result of that were 12 or so families, our best friends, packed up and moved. The break was too hard to take. Factions formed and friendships split. And that was when I sat down to try and write a book about the creative process. I knew it was going to be somewhat engaged with my story, but I thought it was going to be more of a kind of a how-to manual. I was going to take all the lessons I'd learned as an actor, director, creative director, and package it up in kind of in those places. And for about a year, I couldn't do anything. And so then I did what every professional writer does, which is ignore and delete all the emails from their agent and publisher.
I can't hear you. If I can't hear you, there is no deadline.
delete until I mustered the courage to have a meeting with my agent. And in that meeting, there was a woman there who I had never met before. Her name was Meredith. It turns out she was a writing coach, and it turns out I was in an intervention.
Got it. You were set up.
And Alex said, I think Meredith might be good for you. Maybe you could use a coach. And I was like, yes, I would love a coach. And so we sat down and we began to talk about what did I really want to say. And I felt so much pressure to say things in a way that I had seen my friends say them. I felt so much pressure to say things in a way that I had seen other writers and authors. I knew that what I was going, it's kind of like the movie Titanic, right? The movie Titanic, you know what is going to happen, but you don't know how the director is going to get you there. My story, my truth, for lack of a better term, is the hero's journey. It's about, listening to your story. I'm not saying anything new. And so I started getting in my head with that idea as it pertained to the creative process and how I was supposed to write this book. And Meredith did the greatest thing that any coach could do. And she said, just forget about all of that. Forget about the book that you sold. Forget about the book that you think you're supposed to write. Forget about how your friends or other authors would write this book. How would you write this book? And I was like, wow, I think I would just tell stories. I think I'm not a teacher. I'm a storyteller. Maybe storytelling is teaching. And as I came to terms with that, I'm realizing it's one and the same. But the way I was going to go about it was just through the telling of my story. And then as I did that, something unlocked in me. And then once I started, I just couldn't stop. So you're asking why or how. I really am I'm an oversharer by nature. I mean, obviously that you have to know that by where we're going. So I just have that part of me. I don't know what's broken or what's beautiful about it.
Takes one to know one. Junior high was a struggle for me. Let me just tell you.
And I'm also a firm believer that you can't take anyone farther than you've gone yourself. And so I believe that there is freedom in telling your secrets. I believe that there is freedom in coming out of hiding admitting to your deepest, darkest mistakes. I believe that there is freedom in coming out of the cave, as the metaphor talks about in the book. And so I just know also as an artist or as a consumer of art that the things that have moved me are the ones that the people said all the things. Because mainly I go, when I see or hear or watch or read art like that, my response is always, almost always, me too, me too. And I know that I have felt the courage to do that, or to move forward when I've encountered art like that. And so I think it's a combination of one, it was just time for me to say it all, and two, my hope was that, and is that, if I did so, could it also set some other people free too?
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think that that is such a drumbeat in your book. It does not feel like a dish-all celebrity memoir. It feels like you're coming alongside all of us and saying, this is where I've been. And my guess is you've walked some of this road too. And look now. Look at now, after staying with it and dealing with hard things, brutal things, both in your past and then what you did with it. Look at what beauty can come from it, but it's not going to be a slow, it's a slog. I mean, you talked about 15 years worth of kind of peeling that onion. And I want to ask you specifically about this idea of this messy act of remembering. There's a whole middle section of your book where you really look at where you've been. And I talk to lots of folks who are writing memoir, and there's always this question of, what do I include? How do I know what to include? And one of the touch points that you return to over and over is this idea of changing the past.
Sure.
You can change your past, which is completely counterthetical to everything I've heard in my whole darn life. And that you find goodness in these wrenching moments. I mean, you have endured a lot, Blaine. And you have this hard story, this really difficult story that lots of folks would be like, well, I'm done with that and I'm just moving forward, which hardly ever works. So talk to me about this. What in the world changed the past? How do you do that?
Sure. So the moment that I described a couple of minutes ago, where things were kind of up and to the right, things could not have gone better or be going better as my life as an actor. And also at that same time, simultaneously, everything was falling apart, and I knew something had to change. And I came upon the work of Dan Allender, and he's a pastor, author, and he had written a book called The Wounded Heart. And it's basically the Bible for adult victims of childhood sexual abuse, which is my story. And the way I salved that story and that pain is through my own addiction. And as things came to a head, as I encountered his work, I realized he had a school out in Seattle. And I just very impromptu said, I have to go there. Yeah. So I called my agent and I said, hey, I need to take 2 years off. I know things are going really well. They're like, we don't understand this at all, but I guess if that's what you need to do, packed my bags and moved to Seattle for 2 years. And in a class called Faith, Hope, and Love, Dan Allender talked about this idea of time. And the way he described it was that we all think of time as linear, past, present, future. But the way we experience time is actually a bit inverted. The way we experience time is past, future, present. And by that, he would say that whatever's happened to us, good or bad, but often mostly bad, we template and imagine into the future. We think, oh, that's going to happen again. And however we imagine the future is how we live in the present. It's how we protect ourselves. It's just how we go about our days. And so he came up, well, he would say this hyperbolic statement, and you said it as well, is the easiest thing to change is your past, which is ludicrous.
Right.
That's the one thing you can't change. Right. The future, like, it's coming up, I can do something about it. My present moment, I can at least live in it, or I can, it's a bit malleable, but the past is in the past. It's over. It's concrete. It's done. Stephanie Fu has this amazing memoir also about complex trauma. And in it, she talks about her own story as she began to look at it, that she realized she could no longer outrun her story and that she herself had become an unreliable narrator. And I think that most of us, when it pertains to our past and our stories, are unreliable narrators. If we were to really go back into the particularities of our story, especially those moments of harm and trauma and hurt, and really unpack them with a trusted therapist, a really good friend, a group of people who could reflect to you the moments of those stories, you would see that we've probably gotten it wrong. We've narrated it incorrectly. Now, going back into the past and reimagining it and saying, oh, you know what? So I look at the story of my abuse, for example. For a long time, I harbored that as an excuse for my own acting out. As I went back into the story of that trauma, I realized there was a good, very curious young boy who just wanted to be seen. And so instead of taking that story and realizing, thinking and imagining to myself, I can never be in a consistent, committed relationship because I'm always going to be hurt. I always need to be on guard. I got to wait for the other shoe to drop. What happens if I go back into that story and remember it differently and remember it as not a boy who is harmed, which he was. It's both and. A boy who was harmed, but a boy who was good and who was curious. And the idea is once you begin to re-narrate your past and look back at those moments and remember them, put them back together, you then all of a sudden can imagine a different future. And now, as you're imagining a different future, you realize, oh my gosh, I can live differently right now. And there's this cycle and sort of a spiral that begins to gain momentum. I think a lot of us who have encountered any kind of evangelicalism, I think that we've always imagined the journey is up and to the right, or any kind of fundamentalism. And then if you're not going up and to the right, you're backsliding, when in truth, it's really a spiral. And so we're looking back knowing that at the very, kind of back edge of that curve, that spiral, the hardest thing that ever happened to you, the darkest story that you have is actually just a hairpin away from being propelled forward. It is that sort of classic, it's darkest just before dawn. And I believe that that's true.
When you discussed that, when you write in the book about some of these ideas and when you're first encountering them, you mentioned Dan Allender. How do you say his name?
Dan Allender.
All of a sudden I had a moment where I couldn't remember that. And Dan talks about how this is brutal in part, right? Changing the past or taking away the unreliability of that narration and really looking at it head on. He talks about how the reason that is so brutal, one of the reasons, is because fundamentally you're asking, is God good? Yes. Is there an inherent goodness of God? And you write about how, if you just glancing at this, the answer is no, right? What good God allows any of this to happen and doesn't just pluck that 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old boy out. And so I would love for you, we have a lot of folks listening who are asking that question. Is God really good? Is God good even in that? And if so, how is that even possible? I know you're not a theologian, and I know you're not a professional therapist, but what did you decide? Is God good?
Oh, God is so good. I will see your answer, Kim, with a story from The Wizard of Oz.
As one does.
Yeah. So the role that you mentioned, Bach, which I ultimately turned down to stay at school, is the story of the Tin Man. Now, the Tin Man that we all know and love in the movie The Wizard of Oz doesn't start out that way. It's actually this much longer story. In brief, the Tin Man goes by the name of Nick Chopper. He falls in love with this servant girl. The servant girl, the woman that is kind of in charge of her, says, "Oh, I can't have her falling in love. I need the Wicked Witch to cast a spell so that she can work and not be distracted. So essentially the Wicked Witch puts a spell on Nick's axe. And over time, as he's doing his work in the woods, he chops off his limbs. And one by one, he replaces it with a piece of metal until eventually his whole body is made of tin. And what cannot survive in a tin body but a heart? So it's a very long, very gruesome spell, but eventually it works. He falls out of love. The servant girl goes on with her life. Near the end of my time in Seattle, I spent some time with Dan Allender. It was at what was called a recovery week. It was a week where we spent our time telling our stories. At the very end of our time together, Dan what am I trying to say?
You headed out to the shop.
Oh, yeah. So we, near the end of our time.
I've read your book,
thank
so
you.
I know this part.
So we'd finished our time. And the lot of us were given a $20 bill and dropped off in this cool little downtown on Bainbridge Island. And we were meant to go around to the shops and find a trinket, a totem, something that would kind of mark our time at this recovery week. And we were looking through the different stores, and eventually I found my way into this kind of old antique store. And in the back corner, I saw a Tin Man figurine, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. And it made me think about dismembering. It made me think about all the ways that I had been dismembered. And it made me think about the ways that I had dismembered myself, dismembered other people. And so I sat with that little Tin Man as we all sat down to dinner that night. We told our stories. We told the story of our totem. And the kind of last movement of the night was Dan offering communion to all of us. And he did the whole thing. I grew up Catholic, so it's very rote. Here's my body, which has been broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. This is my body, which has been, and my blood has been shed for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And then all of a sudden it hit me, that word remembrance, remember, started to kind of move around in my head. And this little hyphen was placed. And all of a sudden it all kind of made sense that all these places in my life where I had been dismembered by other people or by myself, that God wanted to remember it. So, but I couldn't do, God can do whatever he or she wants, whenever they want to. They don't need me to remember my story, but there is something holy in going back and remembering your story and listening to the places where God is in the moments of your deepest, darkest hurt and pain and trauma, and realizing that God wants to, in those moments, remember you, put you back together, and make you whole, and give you something, give you a new story to tell. It doesn't erase the harm. It doesn't erase the trauma or the hurt. But I would say without a doubt that God is good. I don't know why God doesn't intervene. I don't know why God doesn't pluck us out of those moments. But I don't know if that's the best question to ask. I think the better question to ask is, how does God want to remember me? How can I remember my story? How does God want to put me back together again? How does God want me to be more whole, to be more holy? I think that's a better question. Those are hard questions to ask. I asked the other questions for a long, long time, until my body forced me to have to begin asking different questions simply to stay alive.
When you talk about God weaving something new or beginning something new, allowing you to be a part of that, inviting you to be a part of that, I think about what you and Margaret are building. You're building something really beautiful. You and your wife, Margaret, you write a lot about her in the book and about your girls. She also had parents who struggled with addiction. So you two kind of came together like kryptonite and have
That's right.
figured out how to leverage what you've lived and also move into something new and beautiful. And before I even ask a question, I just want to tell you that is a beautiful thing for me to read about and to watch, and for other people to be doing that. So many attempt to cut generational chains of abuse and addiction and trauma. And it is so sadly, so often they just that feels like too much of a Mount Everest. And you two together, again, this tenacity, Blaine. I mean, you two together sound like you just decided on a daily, not one day. This was not the wedding vow day. This is like a Tuesday, right? Every day you're deciding to do that. So talk to me just a little bit about that. What works? Why has this worked?
Yeah, I think that when I go back, well, one, yes, it is a daily practice. When we met each other, we were exactly, as you said, attracted to the most unhealthy parts of each other. The beauty that we have found is that as we continue to do our work together and individually, that one, we are better together, and two, that the parts of us that meant in some ways to kind of tear us apart and our most horrifically codependent selves are actually healing parts in each other. But that requires a daily commitment, a daily effort, and sometimes it's like, man, could we have had like a love story? Could we have had like just like a little bit of easier time? What did we
happened to
do?
The rom-com, right?
Yeah. Yes. So yes, that is insanely difficult. But the way Dan talks about faith, hope, and love when he describes them, and I talk about it in the book, faith is a memory of God's goodness. So when you say, oh, I need more faith, it's not something that you just conjure up out of somewhere. It is something that is remembered. So I go back, like I said, to the moment of trauma and pain. I go, oh, that's a good memory. It's a horrific memory, but there's goodness in it because I remember that I'm a good, curious person who wants someone to love them and hold them and care for them. And so faith is a memory of God's goodness. If he came once, he'll come again. Hope is a memory for the future. And so hope is what we hold on to. Hope is the thing that we have to imagine. If he came, faith, who came once, he'll come again. Hope is we have faith now for the future. And then love, we just every day just try to put the darn thing into practice without killing each other or our children.
You heard it here. It's just distilling all of that into one sentence.
And
no,
now
this is what I love.
Yes, go on.
No, this is what I love. That's what I'm saying. I think that's why I loved your book so much. And I love the way you talk about this and the way you're living this. This is not patty cake. This isn't some pretty bow that you say, here are my 10 steps to freedom. You are doing this on the daily.
Yes. Yeah. And what I would say is that this is scripture. This is like the blood and guts and tears and sweat and comedy and tragedy of the Bible.
That's right.
Of a walk, of a spiritual walk. The lies that we've been told of the ease that it should be, and what success should look like, or that if it didn't go well, God wasn't in it, but because it did, God was. I have not found any of that to be true.
No.
And I think that, I look back, at scripture, the ground is cursed, and it will require daily tending, and it will require daily death. And I'm so grateful. So we just moved to Atlanta. It is milder than Minnesota, but it is still turning winter. I was looking around the other day, I was out for a walk. I'm like, things are dying.
Yeah.
And thank God they are. So things have to die so that they can, so that new life can grow. And so I think the encouragement is to not shy away or be afraid of those places of hurt, of harm, of death, because I think when we engage those places, that there is so much new life, and then it will suck again.
Yeah, listen, we're we're just not home. I'm in a season of remembering that over and over. There's so much beauty here. And also it doesn't feel quite right because it's not quite right. We're not done. So it's always going to feel like the ground is cursed because it is. And God can do ridiculous things with all of the broken things I lay at his feet. But man, it is a daily. It's a daily. And Jesus is the one who said it. He didn't say, pick up your cross one time and I'll see you at the roller coaster. He said, pick it up daily to follow me. So
that's right.
I love how you're doing that. And I love how you're writing about it. I have two.
Great. Let's do it.
All of my guests, I end up asking this question. It is a nerd question. It is a book question. You have already been very generous with a lot of great book recommendations just as you're speaking. So I know that you're a book nerd. This is a two-parter. Do you have a book that you return to over and over that you recommend? And maybe you've already mentioned that. Sure. It could be really old. It could be just tattered and worn on your bookshelf, but you just find yourself returning to it. And then the second part is there any book coming up? And that could be old too, but just something you've been wanting to tackle for a while that would be new to you.
Yes. The book I keep returning to is not ironically, it's Telling Secrets by Frederick Buechner.
Oh,
it tells,
Frederick. Yep.
He tells the story of his daughter's eating disorder in that book. And again, he just, there's an incredible quote. Basically, in summary, he just says, eventually we need to tell our secrets to each other, or at least to ourselves from time to time. And that in doing so, that we can give others the freedom to tell their secrets as well. So that is a book I just return to again and again. And then when I think about new book, are you thinking about like something I've not read yet that I'm wanting to read?
And again, you could have, I have an issue with this, that I buy books and then sometimes wait 10 years to read them. So it doesn't have to be new.
Yes, 100%. That I haven't read yet.
Yeah.
That I want to read.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Or that you just read. You can take this question wherever you want.
There's a great book it's a novel, John Powers, or Richard Powers, The Overstory.
Okay.
It's an unbelievable novel, and it is about trees, but it is about us. And it is
this a Pulitzer winner? Does it have a really stunning cover? Yes, I've seen this. So you loved this book.
I loved it.
Okay. The Overstory. Okay, we'll put links to all these things in the show notes. So all you fellow book nerds.
And if someone has not bought the rights to that book yet,
you will.
I need to do that. I think about it all the time. In fact, Kim, I need to go.
Okay.
I have to call a lawyer.
Got it. I have my cue. Blaine, I just want to say in your own words, a benediction over you. You wrote these words. These were, I believe, a part of your commencement speech from grad school.
Yeah.
You wrote, "My friends, let faith, the memory of goodness, solidify you. Let hope get you into all kinds of trouble. And let them both ferry you into the realm of what it means to love." I think you are doing that. I think you're doing that in your life. And I just want to thank you for sharing Exit the Cave with all of your readers and sharing your own secrets, not just for the point of the secret, but for the point of the beauty that comes from it. So thank you. Thanks for your time.
Oh my goodness.
And thanks for doing this work.
Thank you.